Hey everyone, back again today. We are going today to talk about realignment. This is the last time that I'm going to talk about it. I have mentioned some on my Twitter page about realignment and my thoughts. As you know, I don't really like it, but I did want to talk about it some since this is really the last season that things are going to look like they've been looking for many, many years. Of course, unless you've been living under a rock, you now know that Oregon and Washington have been selected to join the Big Ten. That's in addition to USC and UCLA. So four West Coast teams coming in. So that brings the membership to 18. And that they're obviously going to change their name. Big Ten sounds a little ludicrous now with 18 teams in. So that leaves three teams left, four teams left in the Pac 12. Cal, Stanford, Washington State, and Oregon State. They're sort of hung out to dry. Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State have decided to join the Big 12. So the Big 12 is going to swell its membership ranks as well. And the SEC next year, of course, gets Texas and Oklahoma. So if you're following along at home, it is a lot to keep track of. I'm not really going to talk about it in that perspective, though. I'm just going to give some general thoughts on realignment and how it's happened through the years. Now, we know that teams have moved every so often. South Carolina, which was one of the early members of the ACC, they left the ACC in 1971 and became independent. That did not have the seismic shift that these moves have, but they did leave. Georgia Tech, if you remember, was a member of the SEC until 1964, and then they also became independent. So those are kind of two big name Power Five teams that did move. Maryland also left the ACC to join the Big Ten. Nebraska left the Big Eight years ago to join the Big Ten. Rutgers was in the Big East and they joined the Big Ten. So it has happened. It just has not happened at this speed and with this many high profile teams. And as we know, the end goal is probably going to be to have a power two, the Big Ten and the SEC, which will probably see their membership somewhere in the 18 to 20 range. And not only will they have the best teams, they will have the best TV contracts, and they will also have most of the spots in the college football playoff, which for the folks who have hoped for expansion to give the little guy a little bit of an opportunity, that's not going to happen. You're going to see the SEC and the Big Ten monopolize spots, probably 3 and 4 spots each. If you leave the automatic bids to the other power conferences, the ACC will stay as a power conference, although Clemson and Florida State are thinking of maybe exploring their options, possibly leaving for the SEC. And the Big 12, kind of as we've said, is going to be bigger, although we don't know how much better, seeing as how Utah probably looks like they would now be the flagship program of the league with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. Why is this being done? Of course, it is being done for money. Television contracts. The Pac-12 fumbled around all summer, all spring. They had a chance to secure some deals. They did not do it. Apple TV came forward with a subscription-based model, and it was going to promise the teams in the area of 20 to 25 million, possibly more based on the subscriptions. But because that is not some destination spot, Apple TV, of course, is an app. It's not on any streaming or basic cable services. People would have to look for it. It would not certainly show up there on its own. Whether or not the Pac-12 had the cachet to do that as a standalone league for people, just are they dying to go to Apple TV to look for the Pac-12? Probably not. So they fumbled around and the membership decided we've had enough of this. So Oregon and Washington going to the Big Ten, while they're not going to get the full share of the TV contract that USC and UCLA will, they are going to be getting $30 million each in the first year. And that's going to go up for the 5 years of the TV contract. And then once this deal expires, they will be able to get the full-fledged membership shares, which is probably going to be $80, $90 million. So even as not full-fledged members from a TV contract standpoint, they are going to be making more money than they will make from the Pac-12. The problem that you're going to have with a lot of this is the travel. You have Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA as the westernmost schools. The next westernmost school is Nebraska, and Nebraska is still a good 17 to 1800 miles from California. So that's not an easy trip. You have to believe that the Ohio States and the Penn States and the Michigans are only going to make one trip west each year. So they're not going to be playing all four of those teams in a calendar year. They'll probably make one trip to USC. Maybe Oregon will come in, or Washington will come in and they'll go to UCLA. But either way, they do want to try to keep the travel to a minimum just because it's going to be so long and taxing. And the other way, too, for the West Coast teams coming out east, that's going to be a bit of a problem. It's good for USC and UCLA now that there are two more West Coast teams in the mix, because that will be two fewer long travel opportunities that they're going to need. But this is going to really impact the mental health of a lot of the athletes, not just in football and basketball, but in a lot of the Olympic sports. In fact, a lot of the West Coast players in some of those sports, softball, women's sports, things like that, they said that they chose the Pac-12 schools because they wanted their families to be able to come and see them play, and they wanted to kind of have the travel opportunities to be at a minimum. Well, now, if their family wants to see them play, they're going to have multiple trips and go 2,000 miles in some cases to see their kids play. So it doesn't look like it's the best situation for anybody. But again, money talks loudest. And so that is why Oregon and Washington have joined the show, and they will be there. By the way, I don't remember, I guess it's because of the brand names, but going into the 2023 season, we've actually had quite a bit of realignment. A number of Conference USA teams shifted over to the American Athletic Conference, UAB, and a number of other teams, UTSA. They have shifted over to the AAC, and that's actually the biggest of the group of five conferences in terms of membership. So there wasn't really the outcry about this. Maybe it's because it is kind of higher level football, and it did leave some of the Power Five teams out to dry. Where Stanford and Oregon State and Cal and Washington State land is anybody's guess. Oregon State and Washington State could go to the Mountain West, much lower TV money, probably in the area of $6 million. Maybe they could keep the Pac-12 going and take some of the West Coast teams from the Mountain West. Fresno State, San Diego State, San Jose State, maybe a few of those. Make an 8-team league. Or if you remember, the Pac-10 originally formed as the Pac-8, Pacific Coast Conference Pac-8, and it did not have the Arizona schools as part of their membership. So if they went to an 8-team, Stanford and Oregon State and Wazoo and Cal would be the flagship programs. It would be a lesser of a Power 5, but it could stay as a Power 5 if it brought in a few of the California schools or the West Coast schools and kept the Pac-12 alive. That may be easier said than done. They still don't have a contract, and we are about 3 weeks away from the season. So it remains to be seen what the leadership of the Pac-12 is going to do with just 4 teams. This season will go off as originally scheduled, but going forward, it is going to be difficult to leverage any sort of capital since those are 4 of the weaker brands. Stanford actually has a good brand in other sports. It wins the Directors' Cup every year, maybe the most well-rounded program of any in college sports. But from a football standpoint, they have been down in recent years, and they're just trying to get back up. It's going to be hard to do that without a Pac-8 or a Pac-10 or a Pac-12 banner behind them. So it's going to be very interesting to see where these schools land. Again, if they do take some of the Mountain West schools to maybe form a new look Pac-10 or Pac-12. But again, on one hand, you have tradition. It would be nice if we could keep things as they were, keep the 5 conferences. They've been part of the fabric of college football for 40, 50 years. But things are moving in a different direction. They're putting more teams in the playoff. There's the NIL. There are, again, multiple millions of dollars of TV contracts available. So I understand why they're doing it. It favors the teams. It favors Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, and any other team that moves over the current TV contract they have. But from a fan standpoint, there's probably going to be a tipping point where they say, you know what, it's becoming too expensive for me to go see my team. Um, the TV windows may not be as agreeable. So I think just from an overall national standpoint, you're going to have fewer casual fans watching these games, whereas maybe fans of their teams will stick around, but the casual fans are probably going to find it too hard to track where everything is and where things are going. So, realignment in a nutshell, I am not really for it, but I understand why it's happening. And again, the end game is to have two major power conferences, which will comprise mostly Big Ten and SEC teams, maybe a Big 12 merger with a couple more teams to give them 18. The ACC may or may not stick around intact. We'll see how that goes. But eventually, the Big Ten and the SEC are going to rule the roost. So let me know what you think about realignment, if it's something you're in favor of, if it's something that you think will help or hurt the team that you root for. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos. And we will be back again later on in the week.